I called a family dinner to talk about my will. My daughter-in-law laughed more than usual, so much that it didn't feel natural. Then suddenly my grandson threw his arms around me and whispered, his voice shaking, "Grandma, Mom put the diamond necklace into your purse to call the police." I froze, but I didn't yell, didn't ask him to repeat it, didn't look at her. I quietly moved that necklace into my daughter-in-law's bag. 10 minutes later, the police knocked. "I'm so glad you're here. Stay with my story until the very end, and leave a comment with the city you're watching from, so I know how far this story has traveled." I should have realized something was wrong the moment Sloane smiled at me. Not the tight, polite, dutiful smile she usually gave me at family gatherings, but a real smile. Bright, almost excited. A smile that made my stomach twist with unease. In 8 years as a Calloway daughter-in-law, I had never seen Sloane look at me like that, like she was genuinely happy to see me. The dining room that night felt different too. The mahogany table I had inherited from my mother shone under the crystal chandelier, set for 4 with my finest china, the kind I only brought out for truly special occasions. In the center sat a vase of fresh white roses picked from the garden. Their soft fragrance mixed with the smell of roast beef I had spent all afternoon preparing. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, like a stage had already been built, just waiting for the performance to begin. "Nadine, you look radiant tonight," Sloane greeted me brightly, kissing my cheek. Her perfume was heavy and intense, making me hold my breath for a moment. She was wearing a new dress, deep red, flawlessly tailored, undeniably expensive. Probably worth more than what I spent on groceries in an entire month. Her blonde hair was styled in soft waves. Her makeup was so perfect that not a single detail felt accidental. Everything about Sloane made me feel like it had all been calculated in advance. Quentin came in behind his wife. My son looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from leaving a construction site that isn't finished yet. At 36, he still had his father's gentle brown eyes and that habit of running a hand through his hair whenever he was stressed, a gesture I recognized instantly. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," Quentin said quickly, giving me a rushed hug. His mind was clearly still stuck between blueprints and zoning codes, but the one who truly caught my attention was Cameron. My 12-year-old grandson hung back by the doorway. His dark eyes flicked constantly between his parents and me. Too serious, too wary for a child his age. He clutched his sketchbook to his chest, the thing he carried everywhere. Always drawing, always watching. Something in Cameron's posture made my grandmother's instincts ring an alarm bell. "Cameron, come give Grandma a hug," I called, opening my arms. He came forward slowly, and when his thin arms wrapped around me, I could feel it clearly. He was trembling. "Hi, Grandma," Cameron whispered. His voice was so small it nearly disappeared into the air. "Are you not feeling well?" I asked, bending down to look at his pale face. "He's just a little tired," Sloane answered immediately, placing a possessive hand on her son's shoulder. "He had soccer practice after school, didn't you?" Cameron nodded, but the moment his eyes met mine, I saw something there that made my breath catch in my throat. Fear. My grandson was afraid, and I didn't know why. "Come on," I said, forcing my voice to stay light. "Let's sit down before the food gets cold." The grandfather clock in the corner struck 7. That familiar sound usually soothed me, but tonight it sounded heavy in a way that felt ominous. Quentin pulled out Sloane's chair with slightly exaggerated courtesy, a habit he'd started doing more often lately, as if trying to prove something. Sloane sat down gracefully. That strange smile stayed on her lips as she surveyed the table. "Everything looks wonderful, Nadine," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "You really worked so hard. Oh, and I love your new hairstyle. The silver looks so elegant." I touched my hair awkwardly. 6 months ago, I had stopped dyeing it brown, accepting my gray hair at 63. Before that, Sloane had mocked me more than once, calling it giving up, and telling me I should take better care of myself. Her compliment today sounded like a campaign promise, hollow. "Thank you," I replied carefully and took my seat at the head of the table. Cameron sat to my right, still gripping his sketchbook. Quentin and Sloane sat across from me on the other side of the glossy wooden table. When I began slicing the beef, Sloane launched into a long story about her shopping day at the upscale district. New curtains, $300 for a decorative pillow that was absolutely necessary, a manicure at her usual luxury spa. The way she spoke about expenses that could have kept me alive for a month made my hand tighten around the carving knife just a little. "Oh, and I stopped by that jewelry store on 5th, she went on, her eyes lighting up. They had this gorgeous diamond necklace in the display case. $15,000, but totally worth it. My hand paused. $15,000, more than half of what I lived on in a year from my teacher's pension. That's expensive, I said. Oh, but Nadine, Sloane tilted her head. You must understand the value of quality jewelry. After all, you have that diamond necklace your mother left you. Worth about the same, isn't it? You should wear it more often. A cold wave swept through my stomach. I rarely mentioned my mother's necklace. It stayed locked inside my jewelry box upstairs. I had never told Sloane its value. I had never worn it when she was around. That piece was tied to the memory of my mother's gentle hands, fastening it around my neck when I was young. How do you know what it's worth? I asked. Sloane's smile faltered for a split second. Oh, Quentin mentioned it once, didn't you, honey? Quentin looked up, confused. I don't remember talking about Mom's jewelry. The air at the table hardened into ice. The clock ticked. Cameron's fork scraped softly against the plate as he pushed his food around without eating. Something was very wrong, but I still couldn't name it. Speaking of jewelry, Sloane said brightly, shifting gears. Nadine, I noticed you didn't bring your usual purse tonight, that black leather one you always carry. I glanced toward the living room where my old brown purse sat. I thought I'd use a nicer one for tonight. Oh, you should use the black one, she insisted. It matches your outfit better, and it has more compartments, more organized, right? I started to feel uneasy. It's fine. This one works. But Nadine, she pressed, don't you feel more comfortable with your familiar purse, the one with all your important things, arranged the right way? Cameron's fork clattered against his plate. His face went pale. His hands trembled. Can I be excused? He asked. You've barely eaten, Quentin said. I'm not hungry. Nonsense, Sloane cut in, her voice sharpening. We're a family, and family eats together. The way she emphasized the word family made my chest tighten. Not love, but possession. Actually, I said, standing, I think I'll go get that other purse. Sloane's eyes lit up. Perfect. I'll come help you. No need, I said quickly, but she was already up, her heels tapping against the hardwood floor. My bedroom suddenly felt cramped with Sloane inside it. She walked around, touched my things, picked up a framed photo of me and my husband on our 25th anniversary. So sweet, she murmured. You two must have been very happy, living here alone now. It must get lonely. I'm fine, I said, taking the black leather purse from the closet. Oh, I'm sure you are, she replied, her eyes briefly turning calculating. But at your age, it might be better to have family close by. Have you ever thought about downsizing? Like a slap. This is my home. Of course, she smiled. I just think maintaining a big house like this must be tiring and expensive. When we returned to the dining room, I felt like something crucial was missing. Cameron sat there, drawing furiously in his sketchbook. What are you drawing? I asked. Just stuff, he said, snapping it shut. Dinner dragged on with an undercurrent of tension. Sloane kept steering the conversation back to the house, money, my will. Until Cameron pulled me into the kitchen, and there, he whispered, Grandma, Mom put the diamond necklace into your purse so she can call the police. What do you think I should have done in that moment? Shout? Confront her? Or pretend I knew nothing at all? In the next part, I'll tell you how a 63-year-old grandmother flipped a perfect trap her daughter-in-law had set using nothing but silence and one decision made at the right time. Don't go anywhere. Everything is only just beginning. Cameron's words hit me like a real punch. I went rigid, staring at my grandson's pale face, my mind reeling as if I'd just been shoved off a step I hadn't even known was there. "What?" I whispered, my voice turning rough. "A diamond necklace?" Cameron leaned in even closer, almost breathing in the shape of the words. "Mom took it from your jewelry box while you were downstairs," he said, so softly I had to strain to hear him. "She put it into your black purse. She'll say you stole it and call the police. I heard her talking on the phone." My legs went weak. I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter just to stay standing. My daughter-in-law was trying to set me up, and my mother's necklace, the piece I had protected for 30 years, was being turned into a weapon to stab straight into me. "Are you sure?" I asked again, still only daring to whisper. Cameron nodded. Tears spilled over and ran freely down his cheeks. "Mom said you're getting old, and someone needs to make decisions for you," Cameron continued. "She said, once you get arrested, Dad will have to handle everything." In that moment, every puzzle piece from the night snapped into place, clear in a way that was terrifying. Sloane's strange smile, her insistence about the black purse, the roundabout questions about my house, my finances, my future. She didn't just want me arrested. She wanted me to look like a confused, senile old woman, someone no longer capable of managing her own life. And if that happened, Quentin would step in. Quentin was kind. Quentin was trusting. Quentin, the man who believed whatever his wife said as obvious truth. My son would take over my money, sign papers for me, make decisions for me. And Sloane would stand behind the curtain pulling every string. In my mind, images flashed like old photographs in a family album. My mother, looking at me on my wedding day, her hands trembling as she clasped the necklace around my neck. Her voice was soft but steady. "Nadine, my precious girl, this has been passed down from your grandmother. Now it belongs to you. Keep it safe. It's not just diamonds. It's our family's love, our history, all the women who came before you." I remembered her eyes shimmering with tears. She knew she was sick. The cancer had spread, but she still tried to smile, as if holding on just a little longer could keep her with me. "One day you'll pass it to your daughter-in-law, or to your daughter if you have one," my mother went on. "But choose the right person, Nadine. Only someone who truly understands the value of family." Those last words rang through me like a bell, and I felt myself fail. I had welcomed Sloane into this family. I had once believed love and patience could build a bridge between us, but Sloane had never wanted a family. She wanted assets. I looked down at Cameron, his face soaked with tears, his dark eyes stretched wide with fear, and inside my chest something ignited fiercely. Not fear, protective instinct. This child had carried that secret through the entire dinner. He'd risked his mother's wrath to warn me. I wondered, how long had he been living with this fear? How many times had he witnessed schemes like this unfold in his own home? "Thank you for telling Grandma," I whispered, pulling him into a gentle hug, tight but careful not to hurt him. "You're very brave." "So, Grandma, what are we going to do?" Cameron asked, his voice shaking. I held him a little longer. In my mind, thoughts raced like fire in dry wind. Then I pulled back and looked him straight in the eyes, feeling as if a line had just been drawn inside my heart. "We're going to turn this around, sweetheart," I said quietly. "Sometimes the best way to catch someone in a trap is to let them believe the trap is working." Do you know what the scariest moment was? Not when I realized I was being set up, but when I understood Sloane wasn't acting on impulse. She had prepared for tonight, prepared with a smile, with shopping stories, with those concerns about my age, and right there in the kitchen, holding that black purse. I suddenly realized, if I reacted wrong, just once, I could lose everything in a single night. My hand shook as I reached into the black purse, rummaging past my wallet and reading glasses until my fingertips hit something cold and hard. There, I pulled it out. My mother's diamond necklace. Its weight sat heavier in my palm than it ever had before, not because of the stones, but because of what it meant. Betrayal, calculated cruelty, a trap designed to shatter everything I had built in 63 years. Cameron stared at the necklace with those serious dark eyes. Even under the soft kitchen light, the diamonds glittered, scattering tiny rainbows across my white countertop. This piece had passed through 4 generations of women in my family, mother to daughter, each one holding it as a symbol of love and continuity. And now, it was being used as a weapon. "How do you know for sure?" I whispered, keeping my voice low enough that Quentin and Sloane couldn't hear us from the dining room. "I was getting my drawing tools from the hallway cabinet," Cameron said, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I heard Mom on the phone in your bedroom. She said this would solve everything. Then she said finally you'd be moved out of the way." "Moved out of the way," I repeated, a cold sensation running up my spine. To Sloane, I wasn't just an obstacle. I was something that needed to be removed completely. I thought of all her hints over the years, those concerns that I forgot things, that I shouldn't live alone in a big house, that I needed help managing everything. Sloane hadn't been talking randomly. She'd been quietly building a case file against me for a long time, stockpiling ammunition for this moment. "Did she see you listening?" I asked. "No," Cameron shook his head. "I was very quiet. But Grandma, she said more." His voice caught. "She said, when the police arrest you, she'll make sure you go somewhere you can't cause trouble anymore. She said Dad will sign the papers, because Dad will think it's what's best for you." My blood seemed to turn to ice. She didn't just want me arrested, she wanted me institutionalized, declared incompetent, locked away somewhere. While she and Quentin took my house, my money, my life, and I knew my son, Quentin could be convinced that all of it was for my own good. I wrapped an arm around Cameron's thin shoulders, feeling the tremor running through his small frame. This child had been living with that fear, holding that secret alone, carrying it in silence. I couldn't bear to imagine the nights he lay awake, worrying about his grandmother. "You're very brave," I whispered. "But now we have to be very smart, too." From the dining room, Sloane's laugh floated in, bright, high, and fake, like the sound of a glass about to crack. She was probably checking her phone, waiting for a signal. The police wouldn't show up by accident. Someone had to call. Someone had to report a theft. I looked at the necklace in my hand, then at Cameron. And in my mind, an idea began to take shape. Risky. But if it worked, it would be perfect. If Sloane wanted to play a game, I would show her what happens when she underestimates a retired teacher, someone who spent 30 years handling manipulative teenagers. "Cameron," I said gently, "I need you to go back to the table and act normal. Can you do that?" He nodded, eyes still wide with fear. "What will you do?" Cameron asked. "Something your mother won't see coming," I answered, forcing a reassuring smile. "Trust me, okay?" When Cameron returned to the dining room, I stayed in the kitchen for a moment to steady myself. The familiar space suddenly felt different, as if everything was watching me, waiting for my decision. The blue tiles my husband had installed 20 years ago, the white cabinets I had painted myself, the window looking out onto the rose garden we had planted together, all of it became precious in a way I had never felt before. This was my home, the place where I was safe, and I would die before I let anyone take it from me without a fight. I tucked the necklace into my sweater pocket, then walked back into the dining room. Sloane looked up the instant I appeared. Her smile was so bright it could have lit the chandelier. "There you are," she said. "We were wondering where you two went for so long." "Cameron was showing me his newest drawing," I replied smoothly as I sat down. "He's getting more talented every day." "Oh, absolutely," Sloane agreed. But her eyes locked onto my purse beside my chair. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind as she tried to figure out whether I'd discovered the little gift she had slipped in. Quentin was on his second slice of apple pie, completely unaware of the fire smoldering at the table. "Mom, this pie is unbelievable," Quentin said, smiling innocently. "I swear you could be a professional baker." "Your father used to say the same thing," I replied. But I didn't take my attention off Sloane. She kept glancing at her phone, tapping lightly, her face still wearing that smile. But her eyes were not. Whatever she was waiting for, it would happen very soon. And this time, I was ready. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:15 p.m., a sharp, clipped sound that sliced straight through the taut, string-tight tension hanging over my dining room. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner and noted the timing with a chill. Sloane had staged everything down to the minute. She'd probably given the police a specific time window to make sure I'd be sitting right here, with what she was certain was in my bag. "I'll get it," Quentin said, pushing back from his chair. "No." Sloane blocked him immediately, her voice sharper than she probably meant it to be. Then she hurried to soften it with a shaky smile. "I mean, I'll go. They might be calling back about the stolen necklace they mentioned on the phone." She smoothed her deep red dress in a practiced motion, like an actor right before stepping onto a stage, and then strode toward the door. Her heels clicked confidently against the wood floors of my house. This moment, I could see it clearly, was the victory peak in a script she'd been rehearsing for months. The worried daughter-in-law, the devoted wife, the one who discovered her elderly mother-in-law, acting strangely and possibly stealing. Under the table, Cameron's small hand found mine. His fingers were icy and trembling. I squeezed back softly to reassure him, though my own heart was pounding like it wanted to break free of my chest. Everything depended on the next few minutes. I heard the front door open, then a man's voice, deep, official. 2 officers, exactly as I'd predicted, a standard response to a theft report, and Sloane's voice carried clearly, sweet in a way that felt suspicious, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm the one who called about the stolen necklace. I'm just really worried about my mother-in-law. She's been acting strangely lately, and when I heard about the theft..." Her voice trailed as she guided them into the dining room. The lead officer was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, the type who'd probably handled countless family disputes over the years. The other was younger, fresh out of the academy, with a stern gaze and a rigid posture. "Good evening," the older officer said politely. "I'm Sergeant Malik Harmon, and this is Officer Joan Park. We're here regarding a report of stolen jewelry, specifically a diamond necklace valued at approximately $15,000. "Of course," I said, rising slowly. "I don't know how I can help, because all of my jewelry is inventoried." Sloane immediately stepped half a pace forward, her face a mask of reluctant concern. "Officers," she said, lowering her voice as if in pain, "I hate to say this, but I think there may be a misunderstanding. My mother-in-law has been having memory issues lately, confused, forgetful. We've been very worried about her." Quentin shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to his wife and the uncertainty forming inside him. "Mom lives alone in this big house," he added, as if reluctantly choosing a side. "We've noticed a few changes." "What kind of changes?" Sergeant Harmon asked, pulling out a small notebook. "Well," Sloane exhaled as if holding back tears, "she misplaces things, gets mixed up about appointments. Last week she called the doctor's office 3 times about the same visit, and she keeps talking about money troubles, which is strange because we know she's financially stable." I listened to each lie, my chest cold and burning at the same time. She was painting a portrait of a woman in cognitive decline, someone who might take something by mistake without understanding what she's doing. The cruelty of it was, it sounded reasonable, believable. It would have worked perfectly if Cameron hadn't warned me. "Mrs. Calloway," Sergeant Harmon turned to me, his tone gentle. "Would you mind if we asked you a few questions?" "Not at all," I replied calmly. Then, like a blade gliding across skin, he added, "Have you been to any jewelry stores recently, specifically the one in the Harbor East district?" I shook my head. "I don't really buy jewelry anymore. Most of what I own has sentimental value." Officer Park scanned the dining room, his eyes taking in the expensive items, the crystal chandelier, the signs of a comfortable life. "Beautiful home," he remarked. "How long have you lived here?" 30 years, I answered. "My husband and I bought it when Quentin was 6. "And now, you live here alone?" "Yes, since my husband passed away 3 years ago." Sloane gave a small cough, as if afraid the story might drift off the script. "Officers, I hate to say this, but I think you should know. Tonight when I arrived, I noticed my mother-in-law was restless. She kept fussing with her purse. She looked very anxious." Every gaze immediately snapped to the black leather purse beside my chair, innocent as a velvet-wrapped trap. Sloane's expression was perfect regret, as if it hurt her to betray a loved one, in order to save a loved one. "Mrs. Calloway," Sergeant Harmon said gently, "would you mind if we looked in your purse, just to rule out any connection to the theft?" "Of course not," I said, reaching for it. "But I should be clear, I switched purses tonight. I usually carry the brown one, but my daughter-in-law suggested I use this one instead." I caught one flicker of surprise cross Sloane's face. Just a flash, but enough for me to know. She hadn't expected me to mention that detail. In her version, I was supposed to be a confused old woman, vague and muddled. She hadn't prepared for me to be this calm, this precise. I opened the bag and began taking out each item, slowly and neatly. Wallet, reading glasses, a small packet of tissues, house keys, the grocery list I'd written this morning. The 2 officers watched patiently as I placed each item on the table, like witnessing a voluntary search measured down to the millimeter. "That's everything," I said, and turned the bag to show them the empty interior. Sergeant Harmon frowned. "Ma'am, we received a report that you might be carrying a diamond necklace tonight. Are you sure there's nothing else in your purse?" "Absolutely sure," I replied. "But I do have a diamond necklace. It belongs to my mother." Do you know what the most suffocating moment was? Not when the police asked questions, but when the entire room looked at me at once, as if waiting for me to make a mistake. All it would take was my hands shaking. One clumsy sentence, one reaction like an old woman cornered, and Sloane's story would become the truth in everyone's eyes. And right then, I realized, tonight wasn't just about a necklace. Tonight was a war for my dignity, my home, and my right to control my own life. I slipped my hand into the pocket of my sweater and took the necklace out. The diamonds glittered under the chandelier. Both officers leaned in to look more closely, and I watched Sloane go pale, as if every drop of blood had drained from her body. "This has been in my family for 4 generations," I continued evenly. "It has never left this house, except when I took it to the jeweler for cleaning. Would you like to know when it was last appraised?" Officer Park asked, "When was that, ma'am?" "About 5 years ago, when I updated my insurance," I answered. "It was appraised at $15,000. A silence fell over the table, deafening. The story Sloane had so carefully constructed was collapsing right in front of her, but Sloane still tried to cling on, like someone falling and reaching for a rope. "But," she blurted, frantic, "that doesn't mean she didn't take another one, the one that was reported missing. Maybe she hid it somewhere else." Sergeant Harmon looked at Sloane. This time, his eyes were different. No longer the eyes meant for a worried daughter-in-law, but the eyes meant for someone being questioned. "Ma'am," he asked slowly, "what exactly makes you believe Mrs. Calloway has stolen jewelry?" "Well, Sloane faltered. She realized she'd said too much, revealed too much. "I mean, when I heard about the theft and knew she's been confused lately." "So you called the police based on suspicion alone?" Sergeant Harmon pressed. "Not because you actually saw property missing?" "I was just worried," Sloane replied, her voice rising slightly with panic. "What's wrong with worrying about family?" Cameron had been silent the whole time, but right then he spoke. A child's voice, yet clear and steady. "Officer, can I say something?" Both officers turned. Children rarely become witnesses in situations like this. "What is it, son?" Sergeant Harmon asked, still kind. Cameron looked straight at his mother. His face was pale, but his eyes held a final decision. No more backing down. "I heard Mom on the phone earlier," Cameron said. "She talked about putting Grandma's necklace into Grandma's purse, then calling the police." Those words dropped into the room like stones thrown into still water, ripples spreading to everyone. Quentin went white. The two officers exchanged a glance, and Sloane looked like she'd been slapped. "Cameron," she said, her voice lowering into something dangerous, "you must have misunderstood what you heard." "No, I didn't," Cameron said firmly. "You were in Grandma's bedroom. You said this would solve everything, that finally Grandma would be moved out of the way." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Officer Park stepped one pace closer to Sloane. His eyes held no friendliness now, only professional caution. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "is there anything you'd like to clarify for us about this situation?" "My son is just confused," Sloane answered immediately, so fast it sounded rehearsed. "Kids overhear things and misunderstand adults all the time." "No, I'm not," Cameron spoke up. His voice shook, but it was clear. "I heard Mom on the phone with someone. She said she put the necklace into Grandma's purse, and when the police arrested Grandma, she'd make sure Grandma went somewhere, where she couldn't cause trouble anymore. And Mom said Dad would sign the papers because Dad would think it was what was best for Grandma." The whole room felt compressed, like the air had been squeezed out of it. Sergeant Malik Harmon looked at Sloane, then asked calmly, his tone still soft, but every word weighted, "Then you won't mind if we check your purse once, correct? Just to be absolutely sure." For the first time all night, Sloane's composure cracked. "That's completely unnecessary," she snapped. "I'm the one who called you here. Why would I have stolen jewelry?" "We're simply being thorough," the sergeant replied gently. "If you have nothing to hide, then there's no problem." On Sloane's face, I saw a chain of emotions slide past like fast-forwarded film. Panic, calculation, then desperation. She was trapped, and she knew it. But even cornered, Sloane was dangerous. People like her don't only attack when they have the advantage. They also bite blindly when they're about to lose. "Fine," she finally said, her voice rough with offense. "But this is ridiculous. I'm trying to help my family, and you're treating me like a criminal." She yanked her designer handbag off the side table and flung it open with exaggerated irritation, as if stepping into yet another role, the misunderstood victim. The officers watched as she pulled out each item: wallet, phone, car keys, a compact powder case. And then, at the bottom of the bag, something caught the light, sparkling, and tiny rainbow flecks jumped onto the wall. A diamond necklace, identical to the one I was holding in my hand. Absolute silence slammed down. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. Officer Park reached behind him and pulled out handcuffs. "Ma'am, I think we need to have a longer conversation." Sloane stared at the necklace, as if a snake had just appeared in her bag out of thin air. I don't understand," she stammered. "That's not mine. Someone must have put it in there." "Who?" Sergeant Harmon asked. "You've had your bag with you all night." Sloane blinked, then her gaze darted around the room as if searching for an exit. It landed on me and turned into pure hatred. "Her!" Sloane burst out, her voice sharp as a knife. "She did it somehow! She's setting me up! She's framing me!" Quentin finally found his voice, but it sounded raw, like someone who'd swallowed ash. "Sloane, what the hell is going on?" But his wife had crossed the line of reasonable explanation. The mask she'd worn for 8 years finally dropped to the floor, exposing the calculating predator underneath. "You want to know what's going on?" she hissed, each word scraped out, her voice nothing like the sweet tone she'd used all night. "I'm tired of pretending I care about your pathetic mother. I'm tired of waiting for her to die so we can get what should have been ours." She pointed around the room like she was pointing at trophies. "This house, her money, everything she hoards while we struggle to pay the mortgage." Quentin recoiled as if struck. "We're not struggling. I make good money." "Good money?" Sloan laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. "Your mother is sitting on $800,000 in real estate and $200,000 in savings while I have to budget for groceries. Do you know how humiliating that is? Do you know what it feels like to pretend to love someone just because they're standing in the way of the life you deserve?" The truth poured out of her like poison from a shattered bottle. Years of resentment, greed, and manipulation. Everything laid bare right there in my dining room while my grandson stared at his mother like she was a stranger. "I planned this for months," Sloan went on, as if she'd crossed the point of no return. "I built the narrative about her mental decline, made sure people would believe she was incompetent. All it would take is one arrest for theft, and we could declare she wasn't capable. I'd have power of attorney for 6 months." Then she turned to Cameron, and that look made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger, it was almost disgust. "But my own son ruined everything," she growled. "My own son chose his grandmother over his mother." Cameron started crying, not sobbing, not wailing, just silent tears running down his face as if his body had no other way to release the pain. Because this was no longer about a necklace, not just about setting Grandma up. This was the moment a child understood that. In his mother's eyes, family could sometimes be nothing but obstacles to overcome. Quentin stood up slowly. His face went to stone, but his eyes were breaking apart. "Take her," he said quietly to the officers. "Just take her." Officer Park began reading Sloan her rights. As the handcuffs clicked closed, Sloan turned to me one last time. There was no performance left in her eyes, only pure, undiluted hatred. "You think you won?" she hissed through clenched teeth. "But this isn't over. I'll find another way. I'll make you pay." Then they led her out. I saw neighbors beginning to gather on their porches, curious at the sight of a woman in handcuffs being escorted out of the quietest house on the block. The daughter-in-law who had tried to destroy my life was finally facing consequences. But when I looked at my son, shattered like a tree struck by lightning, and at my grandson, eyes red, body trembling, I understood something. Some victories come with a brutal price. If you think everything ended when Sloan was cuffed, it didn't. Because handcuffs only lock wrists. They don't lock the truth. And once the truth is exposed, it leaves a void. The kind of void every family fears most. The void that comes after you realize the person you trusted was never truly family. The silence after Sloan's arrest didn't feel like any silence I'd ever known. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. The kind of quiet that only shows up after a storm tears through your life and leaves everything unrecognizable. Quentin collapsed into a chair, head in his hands. Cameron curled up beside me on the sofa, where we moved after the officers finished the initial statements. Sergeant Harmon was gentle, but incredibly thorough. He asked calm questions one by one, sketching a picture none of us wanted to face. When did Sloan start taking an interest in my finances? Had she ever suggested I was forgetful before tonight? Had there been other incidents that could be interpreted as signs of mental decline? Each question peeled back another thin layer of truth, and each layer revealed a seed of suspicion that had been planted long ago. Confusion about doctor appointments, awkwardness at dinner, even her comments about my gray hair looking unkempt at family gatherings. Sloan had been building a case file against me for months, maybe longer, but it was Cameron who brought the heaviest evidence. "Tell the officers about your sketchbook, sweetheart," I said softly, smoothing his hair as he leaned against my shoulder. Cameron looked up at me. His serious dark eyes were still red from crying. "Should I?" "It might help them understand what really happened," I replied, my voice slow and steady. He nodded, climbed down from the sofa, and ran upstairs. A moment later he returned, clutching the sketchbook I'd watched him hold all night. But it wasn't only that. In his hand, he also carried a small digital voice recorder. My heart stopped. "Cameron?" Sergeant Harmon asked gently. "What do you have there?" I kept track. Cameron said quietly, sitting down beside me. Mom says and does things when Dad isn't nearby. I wanted to remember exactly, so I started writing it down and drawing it. He opened the sketchbook, and I sucked in a breath so cold it hurt. Page after page, drawings so detailed they were haunting. Sloane going through my mail when she thought no one was watching. Sloane on the phone with a face twisted with rage, eyes locked on papers that looked like bills. Sloane rifling through my jewelry box, captured with the focus of a child who was terrified and still trying to understand what he was seeing. Mom comes here when Grandma isn't home, Cameron said, almost a whisper. Mom has your spare key. Mom copies your papers, then takes pictures on her phone. Officer Park leaned forward. How long has this been going on? Since last summer. Maybe longer, Cameron answered. Mom told me it was our secret. Mom said sometimes grown-ups have to check on grandparents to make sure they're okay. But I wasn't allowed to tell anyone because it would make Grandma sad. My throat tightened. I realized how brutally Sloane had manipulated my grandson, turning an innocent child into an accomplice, then planting in his mind that it was all for my own good. And the recorder? Sergeant Harmon asked gently. Cameron's small fingers trembled as he held the device. I started recording Mom's calls when Mom thought I was playing games, he said. Mom talked about money a lot, and about making Grandma seem, I don't remember the word, incompetent, I offered softly. Cameron nodded. Can you let the officers hear a few of the recordings? Sergeant Malik Harmon asked. Cameron nodded and looked down at the small device in his hand. He fumbled with the tiny buttons, brows pinched with stress. After a moment, the living room sank into a dry clicking sound. Then Sloane's voice spilled out, clear, cold, unmistakable. That stupid old woman thinks she's so smart, living in that big house like a queen while we drown in debt. But I've calculated everything. Once she's arrested for theft, Quentin will have to face reality. She's obviously losing her mind, and someone needs to take control before she hurts herself or someone else. I felt as if every word was hammering straight into my temples. A short pause. Then another voice came through, smaller, as if from a phone speaker. Are you sure this will work? What if she doesn't carry the necklace on her? Sloane gave a quiet laugh, the kind of laugh from someone confident because they've forced everything onto the exact track they want. Oh, she'll carry it. I'll make sure of that. I already put it into her purse while she was downstairs playing the perfect hostess. The whole family will be there to witness her confusion when the police find it. Quentin will finally see that his beloved mother needs professional care. And then? And then we get power of attorney, sell that ridiculously oversized house, and use the money to climb out of this hole. She'll be in some nice facility, somewhere she can't cause more trouble. And finally we'll have the life we deserve. The recording ended. Silence crashed down over the living room like a thick blanket. No one spoke for several seconds. I stared at the recorder in Cameron's hands, as if I couldn't believe the casual cruelty in Sloane's voice was real. She hadn't just planned to take my money. She had planned to destroy my life and then convince my son it was for his mother's own good. There's more, Cameron said softly, barely daring to breathe too loudly. A lot more. Mom talks to that person. Almost every week. Officer Joan Park looked at his partner, his expression sharpening. We'll need to take this as evidence. All of it, he said. The sketchbook, the recorder, everything. Of course, I answered immediately. Then I bent down and looked at Cameron closely, as if I wanted to carve that small face into my heart. Cameron, you did the right thing by keeping track. You may have saved my life tonight. Only then did Quentin manage to force out a sentence, his voice rough from emotion squeezing his throat. Why didn't you tell Dad any of this? Cameron's lower lip trembled. He tried to hold steady, but tears still shimmered at the corners of his eyes. I tried, Dad, he said. Don't you remember when I said Mom was acting weird? When I asked if Grandma was really sick? But every time you said I was imagining things, you said Mom was just worried about Grandma, because Mom loved her. I watched Quentin's face collapse, like someone had pulled out the pillar holding him up. He had brushed off his son's warnings, chosen to trust his wife's sweet mask over a child desperately trying to ask for help. "I'm sorry," Quentin whispered. "I'm sorry, Cameron. I should have listened to you." Sergeant Harmon closed his notebook and stood. "Mrs. Calloway, tomorrow we'll need you to come to the station for a formal statement," he said. "And Cameron will need parental permission for us to interview him properly, with a child advocate present." "I'll bring him," Quentin said firmly. His voice was low, but this time there was no backing down. "And I want to press charges, not just for what my wife did to my mother, but for what she did to my son. No one has the right to make a child live under that kind of fear and responsibility." As the officers prepared to leave, Sergeant Harmon paused at the door. He turned back to me, his voice lower now, more warning than procedure. "Mrs. Calloway, you should know your grandson may have saved your life tonight. If Sloane's plan had succeeded, if you'd been arrested and then declared incompetent—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We all knew where that road led. A slow, slippery descent into a place called care that sounded kind, but was really isolation. Reassuring words meant to keep me compliant, decisions signed on my behalf, visits controlled. And my final years could have been locked inside a sterile facility, confused and forgotten, while Sloane lived on the ashes she had set with her own hands. But Cameron had stopped it all. My grandson, brave, observant, loyal, had seen through 8 years of careful manipulation and found the courage to speak at the exact moment it mattered. When the police car drove away, carrying the evidence that we hoped would force Sloane to face justice, I stayed in the living room with my son and my grandson. The three of us sat in silence, trying to swallow the sheer scale of what had almost happened. Quentin walked to the window, staring out at the neighborhood where neighbors were still gathered, whispering and pointing at my house. "How could I not see it?" he asked, his voice breaking. "How could I be that blind?" "Sloane had 8 years to sharpen her manipulation," I said gently. "She knew exactly how to use your love, for me and for your son. She knew which buttons to press." Quentin swallowed hard, eyes reddening. "But Cameron saw it. A 12-year-old, smarter and braver than I am." Cameron looked up at his father, tears still on his cheeks, yet his voice was calm in a way that hurt. "Dad, you're not stupid," he said. "You just wanted to believe everyone was good. Mom knew that." The maturity in those words stabbed my heart. This child had been forced to grow up too fast, turned into a gatekeeper for secrets far too heavy for 12 years old. Do you think the nightmare ends here? No. Catching someone doesn't always extinguish their intent, and there are people who become most dangerous precisely when they lose everything, because they no longer have anything to fear. 3 days after Sloane was arrested, she made bail. The news hit me like a real punch when Sergeant Harmon called to inform me. I had hoped for at least a few weeks of peace, just a few, before facing the reality of court and everything that would come with it. "She is not allowed to contact you or come within 500 feet of your home," he said, steady and clear. "But Mrs. Calloway, you need to be careful. People facing serious charges sometimes make desperate choices." I understood what he didn't say outright. Sloane had nothing left to lose now. Her marriage collapsing, her reputation shattered, her future hanging by a thread. Desperate people are often dangerous people. Quentin moved into my house temporarily with Cameron. He couldn't bear to stay in the home that had once been his safe place with a woman he now realized he had never truly known. Cameron slept a little better. At least he was safe, away from his mother's control and manipulation. But Quentin became like a shadow. He barely ate, sat for hours staring out the window, and flinched every time the phone buzzed. "This morning, I kept thinking about all the signs I missed," he said on Thursday morning, sitting at my kitchen table while I made breakfast. In just 3 days, he'd lost noticeable weight. his clothes hanging loose. I flipped pancakes with hands I tried to keep steady, while my stomach churned with an icy nausea. "Do you remember when she insisted on buying groceries for me when I had the flu?" I asked slowly. "Or when she volunteered to organize my medication?" I flipped another pancake, and this time the nausea rose sharper. She wasn't helping. She was looking for an opening to poison me. "And Mom thanked her," Quentin said, his voice tightening with self-hatred. I thanked her too. I thanked her for slowly poisoning my own mother." Just then, Cameron appeared in the doorway, hair messy from sleep, clutching his sketchbook as always. Since Monday night, he almost never let it leave his hands, like it was the only safe blanket he had left. "Is Mom coming back?" he asked, the question he'd asked every morning since Sloane was led away in handcuffs. "No, sweetheart," I answered firmly. "Your mom is not allowed to come here anymore." "Good," Cameron said simply, climbing into his usual chair. "I don't want Mom to hurt Grandma again." The phone rang at exactly 9:30, cutting through the rare quiet of our breakfast. I glanced at the screen and felt the blood drain cold. It was Quentin's home number, the landline at his house. "Don't answer," Quentin said quickly, reflexively, but my hand had already reached for the receiver, as if some part of me wanted to end this by looking straight at it. "Nadine," Sloane's voice came instantly. Different. No sweetness, no pretending, just cold, calculated, and vicious. "I think it's time. We had a real conversation." "You're not allowed to contact me," I said, my hand trembling as I held the phone. "I'm calling from my own house," Sloane replied, and I could hear the hidden smile in her voice. "Technically, I'm calling Quentin. You just happened to pick up. Besides, what are they going to do? Arrest me again? I'm already facing 10 years in prison because of you." On the other end of the line, something was thrown and shattered, a sharp, dry sound, like her last restraint had finally cracked. Sloane's voice grew louder, tighter, more uncontrolled. "You want to know what's really going to happen?" she snarled. "I'm taking Cameron. My mother has friends in other states, people who won't ask too many questions. By the time Quentin figures out what happened, we'll be gone. And you miserable old hag, you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you destroyed a child's relationship with his mother." It felt like the air was sucked out of the room. Before I could respond, Quentin ripped the phone from my hand. "Sloane," he said, his voice cold as steel, "if you touch my son, I will hunt you down myself." Her laugh snapped through the line, sharp, brittle, and so cruel it made my skin prickle. "My son?" Sloane repeated, grinding the words as if chewing them into dust. "He was never your son, Quentin. He was my insurance policy, my guarantee that no matter what happens, I'll still have something valuable to bargain with. And now you've forced me to use it." The line went dead. No one could speak, only Quentin's ragged breathing and Cameron's swallowed sobs. Quentin called 911 immediately. While he did, I pulled Cameron into my arms, holding him so tightly I could feel his small body shaking with fear. The police arrived within minutes, but when they checked Quentin's house, it was already too late. Sloane was gone. The home looked like it had been through a storm. Furniture overturned, drawers ripped open, family photos shattered across the floor. In Cameron's room, clothes were strewn everywhere, as if she'd packed in a frenzy, choosing and tossing, deciding what to take and what to leave with a brutality she no longer bothered to hide. But Cameron was here, with us, and that was all that mattered. An hour later, Sergeant Malik Harmon came to my house. He no longer had the procedural tone from before. His voice dropped, blunt and grave. "We need to consider placing all of you in protective custody," he said. "All of you. She's clearly unstable and facing serious charges. People in her position sometimes decide they have nothing left to lose." "How long?" Quentin asked, his voice hoarse. "Until we find her. It could be a few days. It could be a few weeks." I looked around my kitchen, the heart of my home, where I'd cooked thousands of meals, healed small wounds, and endured the big ones. The idea of leaving this place, of hiding from Sloane instead of standing my ground, made me feel like I'd be handing her a victory. "No," I said, firm. "Mrs. Calloway, I understand how you feel, but—" "Do you?" I cut in, and I felt myself straighten, like my spine had just snapped back into its true place. "Do you understand what it feels like when someone tries to destroy your mind, your freedom, and your life in a systematic way? When you discover the person you welcomed into your family has been planning to poison you so you'll be obedient, easy to control, then lock you away somewhere?" I stepped to the window. Outside was the rose garden my husband had planted for me 23 years ago. The last blooms of late spring were opening, bright against green leaves, like a reminder. Some things survive every season. "I spent the past 8 years making excuses for her behavior," I continued, my voice slower but not weak, trying to keep the peace, trying to convince myself that family means enduring anything to preserve unity. But family shouldn't hurt you. Family shouldn't look at you like an obstacle that needs to be removed. Cameron's small hand slid into mine. "Grandma's right," he said very softly. "We shouldn't have to hide. Mom is the one doing bad things." Quentin looked at his son, something close to disbelief in his eyes, like he was seeing Cameron clearly for the first time. "When did you get so smart?" he asked, half joking, half choked. Cameron answered simply, honestly, "I had to be. Somebody had to pay attention." The sentence hung between us like a painful truth. This child had been forced to grow up too early, placed in the role of guarding secrets too heavy for his age. But he had done it, through love, loyalty, and a kind of courage that made me proud and heartbroken at once. Sergeant Harmon let out a breath, as if accepting he couldn't move us. "All right," he said. "We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood, and we'll expedite the search for your daughter-in-law. But promise me, no one goes anywhere alone, keep the doors locked, and call immediately if anything looks suspicious." After the police left, the three of us sat in the living room. No one turned on the television. No one could pretend to be normal. Sloane was out there, somewhere, and the most terrifying part was this. The woman we thought we knew may never have existed at all. Around midnight, my phone rang. I looked at the screen, heart hammering, and still picked up, like a reflex from a person who has had to face too many things that scare her. "I'm watching the house," Sloane whispered, light as breath. "I can see Cameron's shadow in the upstairs window. Such a sweet boy. It would be a shame if something happened to him." Have you ever heard a threat that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to curse, just needs to whisper to freeze your heart solid? Because the truly dangerous ones don't waste effort proving anything. They simply remind you they are closer than you think. This time I hung up immediately and called the police. They came, searched the area, swept lights along the fence line, checked around the house and nearby streets, but found nothing. No footprints. No strange car. No evidence that Sloane had ever been there. Officer Park explained, his tone practical to the point of cruelty. "She could be calling from anywhere. These days people can make the caller ID display as if it's coming from almost any location. She might not even be in the state." But I knew better. I couldn't prove it, but I felt it, like a pair of eyes pressed against the back of my neck, like Sloane was circling somewhere, not to strike yet, just waiting for the right moment. A woman who spent 8 years infiltrating our family, learning habits, weaknesses, schedules, the gaps in trust, wouldn't quit easily. When I finally drifted into sleep near dawn, I couldn't escape one thought. The real ordeal had probably only just begun. I stood in the courthouse parking lot, watching Sloane being led away in chains. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison for elder abuse, fraud, theft, and harassment. Her bail was revoked after she violated the no-contact order 3 more times, and for the past 4 months, she had been held awaiting trial. The woman in orange barely resembled the polished creature who once sat at my dinner table and planned to destroy me. Prison had stripped away designer clothes, flawless makeup, carefully styled hair. What remained was hardness and desperation, sharp edges exposed, rage sealed inside. As the transport vehicle rolled forward, Cameron slipped his hand into mine. He was 13 now, taller, steadier, but still carried his sketchbook with him. In court, his testimony left the entire room silent with the calm honesty of it. Even the defense attorney looked uneasy, having to cross-examine a child who spoke the truth with that kind of cold clarity. "So, it's really over now, isn't it, Grandma?" Cameron asked. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "It's really over." Quentin wrapped an arm around both of us. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. He was slowly rebuilding his life, one step at a time. He had started therapy to deal with the guilt and trauma of being manipulated for years. Some days were good, some days were bad, but he was healing. "Mom," Quentin said quietly, his voice cracking, "I owe you an apology. I may never be able to repay." "Quentin, we talked about this." "I know," he cut in, not to argue, but like someone who had to say it to avoid drowning in regret. "I brought that woman into our family. I chose her over you and Cameron, more times than I want to admit. I almost let her destroy you." I turned and looked at my son, a good man twisted up by someone who fed on love and trust. "You love the wrong person," I said. "But that doesn't make you a bad person, Quentin. It just makes you human." "But Cameron saw it," Quentin said, choking. "A child saw what I couldn't." Cameron listened carefully, then said, so calm it made me want to cry. "I wasn't blinded by love and hope like you, Dad. I trusted my instincts." We walked toward the car slowly. No one rushed to leave this moment. The trial had been brutal, dragging up every painful detail of manipulation and abuse. But it also brought something I thought I might never get again: closure. When we reached the parked car, I noticed an envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. My hand went cold instantly. For a moment, I was afraid it was Sloane's final message. But it wasn't. It was from her mother. I opened it and read. "Nadine, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now, but I need to write to you before I lose my nerve. For the past 6 months, I've been trying to understand how my daughter became the person she is, and I keep circling back to one terrible conclusion. I failed her. And when I failed her, I also failed your family. I know Sloane has struggled financially. For years, she came to me asking for help, always telling stories that Quentin didn't provide enough, that you were hoarding wealth that should have been shared with the family. I gave her money. I made excuses for her spending. I unintentionally fed her sense of entitlement. I thought I was being a supportive mother. I had no idea she was poisoning you. I had no idea the depth of her manipulation and cruelty ran that far. When the police told me what she had done and what she had planned to do, I couldn't sleep for weeks. I want you to know that Cameron is an extraordinary boy. Watching him testify with such courage and clarity reminded me that good can still grow out of the most horrific wreckage. You and Quentin raised him to be brave and honest, even when it meant standing up to his own mother. I'm selling my house and donating most of the money to organizations that support victims of elder abuse. It can't undo what Sloane did, but maybe it can stop someone else from going through what you went through. I hope that one day you can forgive an old woman who should have seen what her daughter was capable of before she harmed your family. With my deepest regret and respect, Helene Whitmore. I folded the letter carefully. When I looked up, Quentin and Cameron were both watching me, worried, as if one more sentence could make everything collapse again. "What does it say?" Quentin asked. I handed him the letter. I watched Quentin's face change as he read, tight, then still, then soft, then aching again. When he finished, he stayed silent for a long time. "She isn't responsible for what Sloane did," Quentin said at last. "But I understand why she feels that way. When someone you love harms others, you can't help wondering if there was some way you could have stopped it." Cameron listened closely, then asked slowly, like a child trying to name what he had witnessed. Do you think my mom always knew she was bad, or did she convince herself she was doing the right thing? The question was so deep, I had to take a breath before answering. I thought carefully, then spoke with the caution of someone who didn't want to plant more hatred in a child's heart. You know, I said, I think your mom started by convincing herself that what she wanted was reasonable, that life owed her something, because life didn't give her everything she thought she deserved. But then, somewhere along the way, she crossed a line from wanting to being willing to destroy other people to take, and once she crossed that line, she couldn't come back. That night, we did the most ordinary things, ordered pizza, and watched an old television series. The everyday parts of family life, peaceful, boring, suddenly felt like luxury after months of court, police interviews, and tension that lurked like a shadow. Around 10, Cameron pulled out his sketchbook and showed us something new. No more pages documenting Sloane's cruelty. This time he drew happy scenes. The three of us eating breakfast together, Quentin teaching him chess, me working in the rose garden while they played catch in the yard. I don't want to remember the bad things anymore, Cameron said. I want to fill my book with good things, to replace them. And I thought, that might be the best plan a child has ever made. I was working in the rose garden when I heard the familiar sound of Cameron's bike rolling up the driveway. He was 14 now, shooting up fast, and carrying the same gentleness his father had. The sketchbook had been replaced by a camera. He'd discovered a new talent, photography, a talent that even his teacher couldn't believe. "How was school?" I asked as he walked over to me among the roses. "Good. I brought the prints back from the darkroom," he said, pulling out a stack of black and white photos, ordinary moments transformed into art through his patient eye. I studied them one by one. The neighborhood, the house, small details, yet beautiful. In every frame, I could see a clear choice. Cameron chose to look at life through light. "These are extraordinary, Cameron," I said honestly. "You truly have talent." "I learned from you," he answered, then sat beside me on the garden bench. "I learned how to see. You taught me to pay attention to what's really happening, not what people want me to believe." Quentin appeared from inside the house, just back from work. And for the first time in years, he looked genuinely happy. He'd been promoted to senior partner at his firm. He'd also started dating a kind woman named Lisa, someone who understood that Quentin's package deal included a teenage son, and a mother who would always be his anchor. "Perfect timing," I said as he walked over. "Cameron just showed me his newest photos." Quentin studied them with the same focus he used on architectural drawings. "Incredible," he said. "You have an artist's eye." "I want to show you my favorite one," Cameron said, pulling out a photo I hadn't noticed yet. It was a picture of our kitchen table on a Sunday morning, sunlight slanting through the window, falling on 3 coffee cups, a plate of cookies I'd baked, and our hands reaching for butter and jam. Simple, ordinary, and so beautiful it hurt. "That's us," Cameron said, as if no further explanation was needed. "That's our real family." I looked at the child who saved us, through courage and honesty, and felt my chest fill with gratitude. Sloane tried to destroy my family. But in the end, she accidentally revealed what mattered most, what we truly meant to one another. We lost the illusion of an easy happiness, but in exchange, we gained something more valuable, the belief that we could survive anything as long as we faced it together. As the 3 of us sat in the rose garden, among flowers that had survived every season and grown more beautiful year after year, I realized there are victories that aren't about defeating an enemy. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to let hatred take root in your heart. And when I watched Quentin and Cameron laugh together in the golden evening light, I knew that was the greatest victory of my life. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because after justice, there is always a journey of recovery. And sometimes the final twists come from where you least expect them.